off the screen a little bit, so I've changed to a different PowerPoint presentation, so you'll be able to see the slides on the screen now. Hey. Has everybody in here met everybody else? No. One of the things that I like to do when I do a workshop is to give you guys an exercise on your next break. You know, the next break is probably going to be lunch break, right? Before you go on your break or when you come back from your break, I want you to go up to somebody you don't know, and I want you to do a human experience. I want you to go up and introduce yourself and say, hey, my name's Dave, how you doing? I want you to hold their hand and shake their hand and make eye contact. The eyes are the windows to the soul. And then ask each other, how are you doing today? And honestly tell them how you're doing. The whole time you're touching each other. There's amazing power of human touch. You can sense things. For years I taught karate and close quarter combat and stuff. And I was a bouncer for years. If you're physically touching somebody, you can sense when their brain says something to them. You can feel it through skin contact. The same way, when you're holding somebody's hand and you're saying, hey, how you doing? And you're looking in their eye, they can try to BS you all they want, but you're looking right into their soul and you know exactly how they're doing. There's that electrical connection that's right there. It's absolutely wonderful. Don't miss the opportunity. Show an interest in somebody new. Do it again and again and again. When you go to lunch, I don't care where you go to lunch, ask whoever's serving you, they're serving you, right? They're a server. Serve them. Say, hey, how are you doing today? What's your name? Oh, Sue. Sue, how are you doing today? Is everybody treating you okay? Show an interest to them. Watch the difference you can make in somebody's life in literally less than 30 seconds. It's powerful, powerful, powerful stuff. Anyway, after the break, lunch break, I'm going to go back to the original slide with the URL because I understand some people are missing the URL. So don't panic that if you don't have it, we'll get you through it. In the meantime, the slides will cover us. If I can get this thing to turn back on. Come on, baby. There we go. Boom. So we covered the 24-hour program, right? Cool. So let's see what it says now. This is the end of craving, right? The big book, from the front of the book through the doctor's opinion up to the top of page 23, all they talk about is craving, right? We know that while an alcohol keeps away from a drink, as he may do for years or months, he reacts much like other people. We're equally positive that once he takes how much? Any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens in both the bodily, the physical craving, and the mental sense, mental obsession, what makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of who? Any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this, right? So there's a question mark in my book. I asked the guy, hey, have you ever had this experience? You know, have you had the experience when you take alcohol and you can't stop drinking? You intend to have only taken 2 drinks and you have more than 2 drinks, right? You think about drinking all the time. Is that your experience when you're talking to a newcomer? And when they agree with you, you're like, well, come on in. The water's fine. You're one of us. You know, because normal people don't think about that. Normal people don't drive by the billboard and see the bottle with the sweat dribbling down the side and go, what the hell does a Zima taste like? I remember when I first saw that billboard, I was like, what the hell is a Zima? I wonder what it tastes like. You know, if that's not mental obsession, I don't know what is. My understanding is it tastes like crap, but you know, yeah, we drink for effect. You know, that's it. We don't drink for the taste. You know, I was a proof drinker. I'd walk into a liquor store and I'd go up to the counter and I'd say, what's the strongest proof you got in here? And whatever it was, that's what I want. If it was vodka or grain or whatever you could get your hand on, you know, and like I told you yesterday, you know, I'm a member of the No Cap Club, you know. As soon as that cap comes off, it's never going back on that bottle. Here we go. So, come on, baby. Now we're going to start talking about the mind, the mental obsession. 23:1. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. From 23:2. Once in a while, he may tell you the truth. And the truth is, strange to say, that he usually has no more idea why he took the first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses of which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts, they really don't know why they do it. There is the obsession, right? Mental obsession. This is where we get the expression from. That somehow, someday, they will beat the game. They often suspect they are down for the count. If that's your experience, guess what? You've had mental obsession. You know? Cool. What's the only requirement for AA membership? Answer, a desire to stop drinking. It used to say an honest desire, but they took it out. Now it just says a desire to stop drinking. So what exactly does a desire get you? At a certain point in the drinking of how many? Every alcoholic. Does that include you? Yeah. He passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of what? Absolutely no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it is suspected. Right? So what does desire really get you? Sure it does. A seat at a closed AA meeting, period. End of story. I've been at meetings in many places where some newcomer comes walking through the door and it's a closed meeting and they say, are you an alcoholic? Wrong question, folks. How many of us didn't know they were alcoholic when they came to Alcoholics Anonymous? You're asking somebody to go, I don't know if I'm alcoholic. They told me to come here. The judge says I got to come to this meeting, get my card signed, right? You're asking him if he's alcoholic, doesn't know. So you say, hey, do you have a desire to stop drinking? That's the only question. Well, yeah, I got a desire to stop drinking today. Bingo, come on in, the water's fine. Welcome, we're glad to have you. That's the only question we ask, is do you have a desire? Because that's what's required for a closed meeting. Of course, sobriety is going to require a hell of a lot more than just desire, let me tell you. What about think the drink through? Everybody hear that? Yeah, well, I just think the drink through. All right, well, how good does that work for you? 24:1. The fact most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. Plain and simple. You can't think the drink through. If you can, you're in the wrong room. You're not powerless over alcohol. Don't hang out in Alcoholics Anonymous because you're not one of us. Right? We don't have that power. We may think we have the power because our disease will lie to us and tell us that we have that power. But I guarantee you sit on the train track long enough, the train's going to come. But I digress. How we tell our stories, right? We talked about this earlier. When we're telling our stories, what's the purpose for telling our stories? Not to tell our drunkalogue. Each individual in the person's stories describes from his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. We're not talking about how we came into Alcoholics Anonymous. We're not talking about what got us here. We only share enough of that to convince the people in the audience that you know what you're talking about. After that, you're talking about how you set up and established your relationship with God. That's what has a story of depth and weight. These give a fair cross-section of our membership and a clear-cut idea of what was actually happened in their lives. Cool. The effect of time. Right? 30:3. We are convinced to a man alcoholics are type in the grip of a progressive illness over any considerable period. We get worse, never better. We discussed that already. 33:1. We have seen this truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in short time as bad as ever. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we'll be immune to alcohol. Oop, you guys didn't tell me I didn't click it. All right. You notice what I have written there at the bottom? Dr. Bob's reservation. Does everybody know that Dr. Bob had one reservation? Bill Wilson goes out to Akron. He meets Dr. Bob for the first time. And Dr. Bob says, yeah, I understand the Oxford group. I've been working this thing for 2 years. I know the 6 steps. He says, I know part of this program is I'm supposed to go back and tell all my patients that I'm a recovered alcoholic, but I'm not willing to do that because I don't have such a small practice left. I can't go risk my family's welfare and tell all these people that I'm an alcoholic. Right? Dr. Bob was sober. He tells Bill, I got to go to this convention in Atlantic City, gets on the train, goes to Atlantic City, ends up drunk. Right? Why? Because he had a reservation. When he got back from Atlantic City and Bill Wilson 12-stepped him again, right? Dr. Bob says, I don't care what it takes, I'm done. Even if I have to tell all my patients, he had no reservations at all, and he stayed sober for the rest of his life. Coincidentally, his sponsor gave him his last drink, gave him a bottle of beer and a barbiturate. But we don't talk about drugs in AA, right? and they called them goofballs. So he gave him a goofball, and I think it was 2 bottles of beer. And then he sent him in to go do surgery. He needed his hands to stop shaking. You know? But I digress. Yeah. The dilemma of mental obsession. For those of you, 34:2, for those of you who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit on a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. Many of us felt that we have plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it. This utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. What is he describing in those two red pieces that I've highlighted there? Mental obsession. The reason you can choose whether or not you drink alcohol is because if you have mental obsession, you can say, I'm not going to drink. You know, if you don't have mental obsession, you can say, I'm not going to drink. You can put the bottle down, and as long as you don't put the chemical in your body, you don't trigger physical craving. And since you don't have mental obsession, you're golden, right? If you've got mental obsession, you can't get the thought out of your head, and it's just going to drive you nuts until eventually you're going to drink again. You know, and that's why the utter inability to leave it alone. So what's the antidote for physical craving? No, the antidote for physical craving. The antidote for physical craving. Time. I can take anybody in this room that has physical craving and I lock you in a closet for 72 hours. When you come out of that closet, it is absolutely categorically impossible for you to have physical craving. It cannot happen. If you don't put the chemical into the organism, it can't have craving. Yet I was at an AA meeting in Louisville, Texas, and a guy with 42 years came walking in, and we hadn't seen him in a couple of weeks, and he's like, oh my God, I'm so glad I needed a meeting so bad. I've been craving a drink for like a week. And I went up to him after the meeting and I said, did you drink a drink of alcohol? And he looked at me like I was crazy. He goes, what are you talking about? No, of course I didn't have a drink of alcohol. I said, but you said you've been craving alcohol. He's like, yeah. And I go, that's not craving, dude. You don't understand your own disease. That's mental obsession. You were obsessing about a drink, and that's not craving. If you didn't take a drink, and he was like, no, that's just semantics. And I went, okay, whatever. I'm talking to a wall, right? You know, I just walked away. He didn't understand the difference, didn't understand his own disease, right? What's the antidote to mental obsession? That's an even more important question. God. God removes the obsession. And for most of us, and it may have been the same thing that was true for me, I had the mental obsession, and all of a sudden one day I realized, I hadn't thought about a drink in a while. I don't know when it was removed. It just went. I was doing the disciplines. I was going to meetings. I was working the steps. I was, being of service, cleaning dishes and doing the stuff. And then one day, in my home group, I realized, wow, I haven't thought about a drink. It's been a couple weeks. Had no idea when it was gone. But because of my disciplines, God removed it from me. It's a gift. Dr. Bob had it for 5 years. He had that obsession. And that was one of the reasons he was constantly working with other alcoholics, because that was his antidote to keep him from drinking. So until God removes it, doing of service is what will work when all other activities fail. It's written right in our book. But I digress. The crux of the problem. This is something I always like to cover with people, right? How many people have been to a meeting where this was the topic? The crux of the problem. It comes from this sentence. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. Don't you think that's kind of an important piece of knowledge to have? I can't tell you how many times people have never discussed this. When I first got sober, this was a topic of conversation on a regular basis. In the last 25 years, I haven't heard it as a topic of an open discussion meeting unless I was chairing the damn meeting, right? What is the mental state that precedes the first drink? Anybody know? Anybody that I haven't taken through the work before? No? My guys all know. Knowledge. Knowledge is the mental state. And it sounds strange. But before we go out and drink, who made the decision? Us. But nobody on the planet lies to us better than us. Just look at the new guy who comes to the meeting and he's like, oh man, I went out and got drunk last night at this concert. You're like, well, did you talk to anybody before you went to the concert? Well, no, but I thought I'd be okay. He thought he'd be okay. He went and sat on the railroad tracks and he's surprised when he gets hit by a train, right? Knowledge is the mental state. Where am I getting that from? Let's take a look. 36:3, physical suffering from which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. Who came up with that idea? Right? Him. Him on his own. If your disease, alcoholism is a disease of separation, of being alone. And it's a disease of stress. All addictions are a disease of stress. The more stress you get under, the more you're going to want to make the stress go away, and our brain knows, hey, what makes that go away? I know what will cure that problem, right? So this is a guy who shows up to work, right, for a business he used to own. He goes into the bar. He thinks he's going to sell a car at a bar, right? Maybe I'll find a prospect, but I'm hungry. I need to eat lunch someplace. And then the idea comes to him, hey, it's not going to hurt me if I just put the whiskey shot in a glass of milk. Can't hurt me then. Makes perfect sense because his disease got him out of the herd. The expression I always use is the wolf picks off the sheep on the outside of the herd. You got to stay in the middle of the herd. My sponsor, Carl, made me talk to 6 alcoholics a day. He looked at me. You know where he got that from? He said there's a sufficient substitute, right? It comes from page 152. You know, it's the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. So he looked at me and he says, how much on your minimum day of drinking, how much would you drink? And I go, I don't know. He'd say, well, what's the least amount of drinking you could remember that you had in a day? And I said, I don't know, probably a 6-pack. He says, great, I want you to talk to 6 alcoholics a day, right? We substitute our drinking for fellowship. So he handed me a roll of dimes. Back then we had these things called payphones. You put money in, you could make a phone call. He gave me a roll of dimes. He said, I want you to make 6 phone calls a day, right? Thank God I didn't tell him, I drank, 50 drinks a day. I'd be calling 50 drunks. All right? So here it is, all these decades later, I still, to this day, I talk to 6 people a day. And I travel for a living, so I might be in China, or I might be in South America, or I might be in Europe. I got to plan my day around making sure I get my six drunks. Because I'm not going to get to the outside of the herd and get picked off. It's a disease of loneliness. Isolation. If your disease can isolate you, then you're left with your own mind, and the problem centers in the mind. But I digress. Where am I at? Next quote. Now we see that when began drinking deliberately instead of casually, there was very little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences would be. Once again, knowledge will not save you. Right? Next. However intelligent we have been in other respects where alcohol had been involved, we have been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Insanity, right? We're out of our mind. We're insane. We can't bring the knowledge that we know sitting in an AA meeting that's not going to affect me when you're out there by yourself, those crazy thoughts. My father was absolutely a brilliant drunk when he was trying to control his drinking. He says, I got the perfect system. And he put 3 rubber bands on this hand. I'm only going to drink 3. And he'd drink his first drink, he'd take 1 rubber band off and put it on this hand. He'd drink number 2, he'd take the rubber band, put it off on this hand. And then he'd forget which hand he started with, and he'd say, fuck it. The rubber band system did not work. 39.1. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with any exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of what? Knowledge. This is the point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as has been revealed to us at a bitter experience. Boom. He was 40:0. He was positive that his humility experience plus the what? Knowledge he had acquired would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. Right? And then look what happened. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. He did not think. Knowledge was a problem for him, right? He thought he had a defense, and he didn't. 42:1. I now remember what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, where's knowledge come from? Alcoholic mind. The time and place would come when I would drink again. They said that though I did raise a defense, it would someday give way for some trivial reason for having a drink. Right? 42:0. Well, just that did happen and more. For what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and what? Self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental bank spots. You cannot think your way through recovery. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. Right? Knowledge is the threat to you. So how many of you got more than 3 years of sobriety? Right? How many of you put yourself into a situation where I'm going to go to a drinking party or whatever and you're going like, oh, I'll be all right, I'm good. Or how many have had something really good happen in their life and you're like, well, shit, I don't need to go to my home group. I'm there all the time. I can miss a meeting. Who's making that decision? Knowledge, right? Who lies to you better than anybody on the planet Earth? You. And that's who you're going to listen to? That same person's the one who got you here, and you're going to listen to them? Right? What are we supposed to do before we put ourselves into that situation? Number one, we're supposed to have a significant reason for going there. And number two, we're only allowed to go there if and only if we're in sound spiritual condition. That's not knowledge, right? We're making sure that we have a reason to be there, and then we make sure we're spiritually centered. We got our spiritual armor on. And then what I personally do is I always have my big book. If it's not it's on my phone now, and I've got phone numbers. So if I get into a situation and I start feeling a little squirrely, and then I see somebody pouring a glass of champagne and I'm watching them, and they drink half of it and they leave it there, and I'm focusing on the fact that's alcohol abuse. You left half a glass. I realize, wait a minute, something's wrong. I go to the men's room and I can call somebody. I can get back in the middle of the herd, or I get the hell out of there, because I don't belong there. Does that make sense? Cool. Next, are you an alcoholic? In the preceding chapters, from 44:1, you have learned something about alcoholism. We hope we've made it clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Remember I said that if, it's a conditional statement. If, when you honestly want to, you cannot quit entirely. Or two, if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. The first one is mental obsession. The second one is physical craving. Right? Make sense? And because remember what I said before, Bill Wilson knew that if you had mental obsession, by definition, you'd already passed through the stage where you had physical craving. That's why it's an or. Either one of these things, come on in, the water's fine. You're one of us. Ali Ali oxen free. 44:1. If that be the case, notice that once again, it's conditional. If you meet these two criteria, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which, what? Only a spiritual experience will conquer. You can't win by single-handed combat. Ain't going to happen. You need a power greater than yourself. Our dilemma and our solution. 45:1. Lack of power was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? If the big book is a good textbook, it's going to tell us where and how. The problem is they take 10 pages to tell you. They don't tell you until page 55. But there's some really good stuff between page 45 and page 55. Let's see what they got in there. 42:2. When they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. You notice it's a conditional. It's an and. There's two separate pieces. There's a spiritual answer. That is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? We have the fellowship, completely separate from the program. People think that they come to an AA meeting, they're in Alcoholics Anonymous. No, you're in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. That is, you're in the fellowship. You're hanging out with alcoholics. If you haven't done the 12 steps, you're not working the program, right? One of the steps is prayer and meditation. The other day I was talking to a guy with, he's in the high 30s in his sobriety. And I said, so tell me about your prayer and meditation life. And he's like, well, I pray every morning. I said, what about meditation? He goes, I don't do really well at meditation. And without even thinking, it came out of my mouth so fast. I'm like, well, then you're not working Alcoholics Anonymous. And the look on the guy's face was just like, what? And I said, well, sorry to be so blunt, but that's the truth. It says prayer and meditation. It's not negotiable. You can't pick and choose what you want to do. I said, but now that I destroyed his reality, I had to rebuild it and say, but let me show you the kind of meditation we do. We do guided meditation in Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't do Mushin meditation, mind of no mind. We can't get the hamster off the wheel. We got the chatter of 1,000 monkeys up there. You're not going to overcome that when you're one day sober, sorry. But anybody can do guided meditation, and I'm going to teach that to you this weekend. Really important skill set. And the guy was kind of shocked, and he's like, I've never heard this stuff before. And when I showed him in the book, he's like, oh my gosh. And I planted a seed. Whether it germinates or not, that's up to him. He's got to pick up the tool. All right? Let's look at this promise. Did it show up there? It did. Quite important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve how many? All. To me, guys, this is a much better promise than the 9-step promises that we read. It's telling me my solution. Oh, okay. Yes? My foot is caught on something? Oh, thank you. Thanks. I'm a mess. That's why I have you guys to take care of me. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles will solve your problems. I cannot overemphasize this. When your spouse comes to you and says, I want a divorce, the answer is God. When your boss comes to you and says, you're fired, the answer is God. When the doctor comes to you and says, it's a bad test result, the answer is God. I cannot beat that into you enough. And it doesn't seem logical. When I broke my back and the doctor said, you're probably not going to walk normally ever again and your flying days are over, I looked at him very seriously straight in the eyes and said, you don't know my God. And he got this look on his face and he's like, what? I said, I'm going to fly again. You don't know my God. 5 years later, I was flying again. Defied reality, right? But he honestly didn't know my God. And I fell back on the power of God. You know, I've done it over and over and over and over again in my life. When it's the darkest, you got to go back to God. It's the only thing we have, folks. To think you have anything else is a fool's errand, because that means you're running the show and you're an idiot. You're working for an idiot, you know? But I digress. And no, I don't have an opinion on the subject. All right, the big book gives us four items to commence spiritual growth, right? Let's take a look at them. Number one, we found as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice. What is prejudice? A preconceived idea. Thinking beforehand before we even know what the facts are, right? Two, we have to express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, right? There it is again, willingness. Remember I said there's willingness in all the steps? We commence to get results even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define and comprehend the power which is of God. Check out this conditional promise. It's a wonderful thing. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, the spirit of the universe, the totality of all things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided, there's the condition, we took other simple steps, right? What step? Well, let's see if we can find them. 46:2, we found that God doesn't make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to how many? All men. All right? And lastly, when therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all that was needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relationship with God as we understood him. That's where I get the expression 4 items to commence spiritual growth. They're up there, 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right? Well, if he gives us the things to start spiritual growth, let's see if he gives us a warning. 3 blocks to spiritual growth. 47:4 to 48:0. Besides a seamlessly ability to accept much unfaith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy. Alcoholics are obstinate. You know, if you're married to an alcoholic and you say, don't do that, guess what they're going to do? The exact opposite, right? That's how we're hardwired. Tell me not to do something and I'm going to damn well do it just because I'm a defiant, obstinate alcoholic. Number 2, sensitiveness. Alcoholics are overly sensitive people. You hurt my feeling. You know, wah. You know, woe is me. You know, our favorite song is, you know, nobody loves me, everybody hates me, I'm going to go eat worms. You know, that song when you're a little kid, that's us. That's, we act like we got this cloud over our head. It's a perfect excuse to go drink, you know. And number 3, unreasoning prejudice. That means a preconceived idea without thought. Unreasoning prejudice. Those are the blocks to spiritual growth. So, we talked about the body. Physical craving. We talked about mental obsession. And there's the third piece. We can get healed from physical craving and mental obsession. That's what makes me a recovered alcoholic. Today, sitting in this chair, I am not craving because I haven't put alcohol in the body. I'm not thinking about a drink constantly. So I don't have mental obsession. I am as recovered can get today. Right? What I do have is a spiritual malady. There's something broken in me, and because of that brokenness, the program says I get a daily reprieve. based on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. What is a reprieve? That is the stay of execution of a condemned man who's condemned to death. That's the definition of reprieve. I am condemned to death from the disease of alcoholism, right? But every single day I get a stay on that as long as I seek God and plug into God. I get one more day sober. The problem is my debt gets one day greater because God gave me another day sober. So I get up the next morning and I go to God and say, God, what can I do for you today? He keeps me sober that day and my debt gets one day greater. So the next day, it's just a constant repeating thing for the rest of my life. Let's look what it says about spiritual malady. From the forward to the second edition. The physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma. We're talking about Dr. Bob, but it had failed. When the broker, Bill Wilson, gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a what? Willingness he had never been able to muster. From 23:2, once this malady has a real hold, we are a baffled lot. 92:1, if you are satisfied he is a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. 92:2, continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. I actually had somebody come up to me and go, where are you getting the spiritual malady crap from? It's in this thing, it's in the black in this book, from 138:1. I spent 2 hours talking to him about alcoholism, the malady, and described the symptoms and results as well as I could. Right? Cool. Is there one more? Yes. Yep. 64:3. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Right? That starts right at the beginning of our 4-step. Cool. Bedevilments. Everybody know the bedevilments, right? There's 9 of them. We had to ask ourselves, from 52:2, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. We could not make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We could not seem to be a real help to other people. Was not the basic solution of these bedevilments more important than we could see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. This is a great way to spot check your recovery. People always ask me, when should I write inventory again? I'm like, when any of the bedevilments show up. Are you full of fear? Is it biting you in the butt? When you're doing your daily 10 step and you're going through, your 11 step, going through those 12 questions every morning, is fear showing up? Is resentment showing up? Do you have spiritual plaque in your life? Can you see that you're having trouble with relationships? Is everybody an idiot that's pulling out in front of you that's doing 5 miles an hour below the speed limit? It's probably time to write inventory. There's somebody back there shaking their head like, yeah! Oops, back one. From the 12 and 12. Many A goes in for annual or semi-annual house cleaning. I am one of those guys. I go in for semi-annual house cleaning. Every January, every June, I write inventory, right? Because as good as my 11th step is and my constant checking, nobody lies to me better than me. And I'm the idiot doing the checking on a daily basis. So because of that, some stuff slips through the cracks. And so every 6 months, I go through the steps formally. I start at step 1, I grab somebody, and we go through the steps together. We swap 5 steps. It's a wonderful experience because you're peeling an onion, and there's a new layer that needs to come to the surface. I've had dozens and dozens of old-timers that are sitting in AA meetings going, well, you do one inventory for the rest of your life. And I'm like, no, I don't know where that's written. It's all over our book and in our history books. It talks about, Dr. Harry Tebow will tell you need repeated inventories. The 12 and 12 says you need annual or semi-annual. And I like, how do you reconcile that? It says on a yearly basis or bi-yearly. You tell me where you're getting this so you don't ever have to do another inventory. Well, I just stay sober on 10, 11, and 12. But the same guy, his kids don't want to talk to him, his wife just left him, and his boss just fired him, but I don't judge. All right, there's an alcoholic cycle, right? This is something that I would encourage you. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because we don't have the time for it. But whenever somebody new comes into the program after they've relapsed, I make a beeline for them after the meeting, and I go up to them and say, hey, when did your relapse begin? And they'll say, well, I thought I shared that. I got drunk last Friday. And I go, that wasn't the beginning of your relapse. When did your relapse begin? And they'll go, what are you talking about? I drank last Friday. I go, no, it started before then. They think about it for a second. They go, well, I hadn't been to a meeting in 2 weeks. And I go, it's before then. And I go, well, I haven't talked to my sponsor in 3 months. And I go, it's before then. And we work it all the way back up to the point where they stopped praying and meditation. They weren't doing prayer and meditation, therefore they didn't have their daily reprieve. They didn't go out and drink the next day or that day. The sky didn't fall in on their head, right? It's not how it works. But the relapse had begun, right? So we don't do our prayer and meditation. We step out from under the grace of God, and the world doesn't come to a screeching halt. And we're like, wow, this isn't bad. And so we go a couple days, a couple weeks, we stop talking to our sponsor, we stop going to meetings, and then all of a sudden, something sticks in our craw, right? We get restless, irritable, and discontent, right, as it says? And once we're restless, irritable, and discontent, we live that way for a couple weeks, and everybody's an ass, and nobody knows how to drive except us. We're the best thing on the planet, and our wife's an idiot, and why is she nagging me all the time? And then all of a sudden, the thought pops into our head of what will make this go away. And we can't seem to shake it. And the weird thing is, for most people that are sitting in this room, most of us are what technically we call polyaddicted. We have alcoholism and something else. We overeat, we gamble, we smoke, we dip, we spend money we don't have, all of which we do to get so we can feel better. It's called self-soothing in the psychological terms. We do self-soothing behavior. We know that if we drink, we're going to die. It's a death sentence. So 99% of us will revert to our secondary addiction. You know, talk to any woman that's just gotten broken up with her boyfriend, and what do? They sit there, they have a quart of Haagen-Dazs ice cream because it makes them feel better, right? That's what we do. We turn to something that makes us feel better. And I don't care what it is, all right? And then, so our relapse has begun. You know, if we do happen to drink alcohol, talk to anybody that slips and goes out and has a drink. What do they say? They all say the exact same thing. Well, I took a drink and nothing happened. So the next day, I took 2 drinks. It seemed to be okay. And then they get this weird look on their face and they say, but you know what? In about a week or so, I was drinking more. It was like I had never quit drinking. I was drinking more than I ever drank in my entire life. Boom, there it was. It showed back up, right? So when somebody new comes into the program that has relapsed, go talk to them. Refresh your memory what it's like and teach them about the alcoholic cycle, because there is a cycle to this disease. Secondary addictions. I put this list together. It's not conference approved. It's Dave approved. Just the things we do. Alcohol and drugs, you know, hurting ourselves, the self-destructive behaviors, chewing, dipping, cutting. Look at one of the bold letters up there. Unforgiveness. We'll talk about that when we do Theater of the Lie. So many of us are walking around with a resentment against that son of a bitch that hurt us so terribly. I will never forgive them. Well, it happened 30 years ago. Who are you torturing? You're torturing yourself for 30 years. Every day that thought pops into your head. You're torturing yourself. They have forgotten about the event years ago. You know, you're the one that's doing it to you, not them. Terribly addictive, destructive behavior. Money, spending money, going for power, control, materialism, shopping, eating, gambling, stock market, trading futures, thrill seeking. Ooh, adrenaline dumps. Any adrenaline junkies in here? You know, racing cars, climbing mountains, flying under bridges. Did I say that out loud? Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, right? Sex, you know, pornography, work, anger, rage. Any rage junkies in here? You know, early sobriety, I used to judge my sobriety how often in a month I'd have my car airborne, literally airborne. I mean, I was insane behind a 3,000-pound weapon, you know, because I was out of my mind. Untreated alcoholism. Separation, computer games, things that take our time where we're just completely and totally focused. You ever been in the middle of that great song and all of a sudden you're listening to Spotify or something on your phone, you're really into the music and all of a sudden the phone starts to ring and the music shuts off? And you're like, oh, that's my favorite part of the song. You just get that adrenaline dump, man. Am I the only guy that does that? Okay. Negativity and bigotry, you know, negativity, negative self-talk, wallow in the messy bog. Woe is me, life sucks. We have to tell everybody about how much our life sucks and try to get everybody, oh, you poor little thing. Yeah, your life really does suck. Abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, you know, and control. Control is a drug, guys. You know, that totally, anybody that's got a codependency issue, an Al-Anon issue, where you're totally focused on another human being and you're digging through their phone to try to figure, where are they? Oh my God, he didn't call in 10 minutes ago. Where is he? I need to find him. That's abusive behavior. We know it's not good for us. It's not good for them. Who are we abusing? Yourself, primarily. And when you let them know about it, they take offense. You're abusing them too. Like, can I get any space in my damn life? What are you doing here? Are you my mother? Come on, Anyway, I digress. Gift of desperation. One of my favorite things. Why do I call it the gift of desperation? What's the antidote to the gift of desperation? G-O-D. Gift of desperation, or God. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we've been on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was the great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes it was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. That's why you need a 12-step. You can't hurt anybody more than alcohol has. It will beat them into a state of reasonableness. Somebody comes in and says, well, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in Alcoholics Anonymous because it says you got to believe in a power rating. Good luck. Here's $20. I'll drive you to the bar, Doesn't bother me a bit. You'd be shocked at sometimes I'm in meetings and somebody comes in there and says, well, I'm not really sure I'm an alcoholic. And I'm like, well, go drink. People are like, oh, you can't tell somebody to go drink. I'm like, that's what our book says. If you're not convinced, try some controlled drink. Try it more than once, And they want to run me out on a rail. Oh, you're being cruel. I can't believe you told that poor newcomer to go drink. Sorry, I digress. Our own answer, 50:2. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. So I don't care if you're a Muslim, Christian, Jew, Shinto, Tao, you want to believe in a doorknob, it doesn't matter from my perspective and what the book says. It's for you to decide, right? Experience has taught us that these are all matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. When I first got sober, I used to say, if you don't believe in God, you can get sober with my God. I don't say that anymore because you can't. You got to get sober with your God, your conception of a power greater than yourself. And I have now learned how to show you how to find a conception greater than yourself. So if you don't understand, I'll say, well, here, let's try some exercises, and I'll give them some tools to help them discover a power greater than themselves. Because that's what my job is as a sponsor, But I tell them point blank, you can't get sober with my God, because my God's my God. It won't make sense to you. You got to understand what your God is. Some people have, particularly Catholics, have a mean and judgmental God, because that's what they were taught. And you have to go to confession every week because we're bad people. They've been beaten into them since they were little kids. There's other people that their God is just pure love and gracious and kind. And how do you get two extremes? A lot of our idea of God is what we were raised with or what our experience in life with. And we've all had different experiences. So let's see what your experience, what have you learned from those experiences? So we go through the experiences and pull out God's and the little miracles and the things that you know to be true from your own personal experience. And before you know it, a mosaic of your own God appears. And that's your conception of God. I don't have to agree with it. That's you from your own experience. And that's the job of a sponsor, is to help you get to that point. Does that make sense? Cool. Next. Second step proposition, one of my favorite pieces of the book. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a what? Self-imposed. So who did it to you? You, that's right. The person in the mirror. We could not postpone or evade. So is there any door number 3? No. Is there any door number 2? No. There's one door, right? This is the one thing you're going to have to face if you're going to be working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was your choice to be? Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. Couldn't be any clearer, right? If God is everything, what do we have to give to God? Everything, right? What's the problem with alcoholics? When we walk through the door, we want them to get the monkey off our back, right? God, I can't stay sober. I just need help with this. I'll keep the girlfriend. Don't worry about the bank account. I got the bank account. I got the job. I'll just get the monkey off my back. That's not what Alcoholics Anonymous is selling, folks. You have to give it all to God. Your health, your sobriety, your work, your career, all of it goes to God. And we have faith that God's going to give back what's in our best interest. That's why it's critically important to have a conception of a God of your understanding. If you don't trust that God's going to give you something back that's a deal breaker for you, you're never going to give it to him in the first place. Does that make sense? Really important. So where and how do we find God? Remember the original question from page 45? They're going to tell us. Where? Actually, we're fooling ourselves, for deep down in how many? Every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by which is insanity, chaos, by pomp, ego, or by worship of other things, money, control, power, authority. But there's some form or other, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstration of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. And so how do we find God? 55:3. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly. Where are we going to see those two words again? Fourth step, right? Fearless and searching moral inventory, right? Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but capital He was there. He was much as a fact as we were. We found the capital great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is what? Only there that He may be found. The Spirit is in you. Remember, where does the problem reside? In our minds. Top of page 23, right? So the itty-bitty shitty committee that's up in here, that's the problem, right? You're not going to find God up in there. Our job is to do the drop. Go down into your heart where the Holy Spirit is. That's where you're going to connect with God, deep down in every man, woman, and child. So it's down in your heart, right? Interesting conception. In a lot of religions, they talk about your heart having eyes, right? You see through the eyes of your heart. What they're talking about is seeing God as God sees through the love that you express through your heart when you become a channel. And those of you that are nodding your head have had that experience. You know what I'm talking about. If you haven't had that experience, give us some time. We'll show you how to have that experience. The proper attitude promise, right? If our testimony helps, number one, sweep away prejudice, two, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search within yourself. If you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, what?
You cannot fail.
Talk about a promise. You cannot fail? Are they lying? No. This attitude is going to be repeated again back when we do our daily prayers and meditations. There's a section there where it talks about an attitude. And they're making reference to this, right? We need the four things. You need to sweep away prejudice, think honestly, encourage you to search where? Within yourself, in your heart. Not in your mind, in your heart. And then you can join us on the broad highway, right? Way cool. Second step instruction. We passed right over it. It says, therefore, when we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies too to other spiritual expressions you'll find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you have against spiritual terms deter you from asking yourself. Oh, did it click? There we go. Do not let any prejudice you have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. This instruction tells you to go through the big book and look for every spiritual instruction and ask yourself what it means to you. Most 99% of the people in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous have never done this. You know, there's expressions in the big book like the Tsar of the Heavens. I had to look up what a Tsar was. It's a Russian ruthless dictator from the 1930s. Well, is that my conception of God? Hell no, right? That's not what my conception was. And so I had to go through and look at the spiritual expressions in the big book. Well, being an anal retentive that I am, I've created a sheet with every expression of God in the big book, right? These are every single one of the instructions. And on that link that I gave you earlier, if you go in there, you will find the 7-second step exercise. And it's every single spiritual expression, and I give you the page and the paragraph number, right? It's taken out of context. I've just given you the expression. So sometimes you have to read the paragraph before and the paragraph afterwards to kind of put it in context, and then ask yourself, do I have any experience with this? What does this mean to me? And then you have a little box there and you write the answer in there. And the cool thing is by the time you answer all these questions and you go through, and you'll start to develop your own conception of God. What is your God and what is not your God? What are your real conceptions? Is your God a God of love, or is he a God of hellfire and brimstone and condemnation? What is it? You do this exercise and it'll lead you to the path, right? There's the back of the sheet, right? And you get all the way down to the bottom. That big box at the bottom are references to God. They're all little individual references, right? From this, you create your own vision of God, right? I have my guys write out a vision of what their God looks like, right? And then I have them list the attributes of their God. Is your God a God of love, or is he a God of hate? Is he a God of judgment, or is he a God of grace? What is your God? And whatever that happens to be, they guys list it down on a piece of paper, and then now they have a conception of the power greater than themselves. It makes it so much easier when you try to turn your will and your life over to the power, if you know what the hell the power is and how it does it act and what is your experience with it. And I don't care who you are, you've had some experience with a power greater than yourself. You just didn't know it was the experience when you were having it. This exercise will show you that experience. It'll filter it out. It's a phenomenal deal. And it comes right out of the book. Just nobody ever bothers to do it. What did I crick up there? One more thing. Boom, here we go. Step 3, right? How long have I been going, JR? Do you know? Okay. We're going to just keep on going. Step 3 condition. Condition number 1, right? We got the ABCs, right? We read this at every single meeting. It really bothers me, and this is just Dave's opinion, why we read it. Everybody reads how it works out of, and it started out here in California. It's now spread across the entire country. And all it is about 3.5 minutes where nobody's paying attention. And everybody's whispering and talking, and we don't even realize what the words mean. There's so much meat in that section. I wish we'd stop reading it every single A meeting.
25 more minutes.
I got how many?
25.
25. Thank you, sir. So, why do I say that? Because so much hinges on what's said in those paragraphs, right? We read the 12 steps, and then we have the ABCs. A, that we were alcoholic, could not manage our own lives. Is that true for you? Is that true today for you? It damn well better be. B, that probably no human power could relieve your alcoholism. I need a reminder of that every single day. It doesn't matter that I've been sober for decades. My sobriety is contingent on my relationship with God, period, stop, end of story. If I forget that, I'm a walking dead man. When I get up and walk out of my door in the morning without saying my morning prayers, I am wide open to suddenly or strange mental blank spot whacking me upside the head. The only thing keeping me sober is the grace of God, period. Because I'm walking out without my spiritual armor on, right? C, that God could and would if he were sought. In the original version of the Big Book, that was written as God can and will if he were sought. I wish they kept the original version, right? And look at the next 2 words. Being convinced. Being convinced of what? Of the ABCs. It's an important thing to ask yourself, right? We were at step 3. Notice we haven't taken step 3. We're still on step 2 here. We were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that, and what do we have to do? If this is a good textbook, they're going to tell us, right? The first requirement. If there's a first requirement, by definition, what does that mean? There's got to be a second, at least, right? Otherwise, it would say the requirement, right? So the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Question mark, are you convinced of that? I run into people all the time where they're not convinced of that. Well, my drinking life's all screwed up, and they look at me and they go, but I haven't had a problem at my job. And I'm like, oh, really? You having a problem at your job? Let's talk about that. And we go through and we have a discussion. And they realize that their job, yes, their boss hasn't said anything bad to them. They're getting good reviews at work. But their wife is pissed off as hell because they spend every living minute at work. And she can't get a word in edgewise. And when he comes home, he's busy doing his project because he's trying to get a raise at work. Yeah, your life is unmanageable when it comes to work. But they need to be shown that because they can't see it. They're not looking through the right filter. Does that make sense? That's the job of the 12-stepper, is to show them where the holes are in their logic, right? Because you clearly can't go past here if you're not convinced that your life run on self-will can hardly be a success. You need to run your life on the power of God. That's what we're selling in Alcoholics Anonymous. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with someone or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, belly, and the scenery and the rest of the players in his own way. That's self-will run riot right there, guys, in description. If you can't identify with that, you might be in the wrong place. Second condition for step 3. This is the how and the why of it. Here comes our second condition, right? Remember, I said first, and here comes number 2. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Question, is that your experience? When you play God, are you successful at it? If you were, you wouldn't be sitting in this room, I can tell you that. but it needs to be brought out, right? It didn't work. Next, we decided hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He's the principal, we are his agents. He is the father, we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of a new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. Right? The third step decision. We already started talking about this, right? What is the decision? Right? The decision is that God is going to be our director. What does a director do for the actor? He tells them what to do. So I'm going to let God tell Dave what to do. That's my first part of my agreement. There's 3 parts to this agreement. The second thing is he is the principal, we are his agents. I like to think of an insurance company. If State Farm is your insurance company, the corporation of State Farm is the source of power. I go to Joe Blow, the State Farm agent. He represents the source of power. He writes the contract, I pay him the money. When I have a claim, I go to him, and he goes to the source of power, and the source of power cuts the check. He doesn't cut the check. He's not the source of power. He's just the agent. So I'm going to let God be the source of power. He's going to tell me what to do, and I'm going to be representing God here on this earth in this physical form. So I'm not working for me, I'm working for God. He is the father, and we are his children. What is a father supposed to do for his children? Love them unconditionally. Period. Stop. End of story. I always tell the story. I saw an interview of Jeffrey Dahmer's dad, and he's got tears running down his face, and he says, my son has done abhorrent things, and through the tears he chokes out, but he's still my son, and I love him unconditionally. I detest what he did to those people, but he's still my son. That's a father. He loves unconditionally. He provides, he protects, he cares for, he instructs, he teaches, and when we get out of line, he corrects us back. That's what a good father is supposed to do. So the agreement for my third step decision is I'm going to let God tell me what to do. I'm going to be God's representative here on this earth, and we're going to have a father-son relationship where I'm going to trust him to love me unconditionally, provide everything I need, give me all the resources I need, and I'm going to stick close to him and do his work well, period. End of story. That's the third step in a nutshell, right? And then Bill Wilson gives this wonderful prayer, right? It's highlighted in red. And look down in the second paragraph. I've highlighted in red. It says the wording was, of course, quite optional, so long as we express the idea, voicing it without reservation, right? If you've never written your own third step prayer, you're missing a really cool experience. It's an awesome experience. Even the new guys, we read this third step prayer, we get on our knees and we say the third step prayer, Bill Wilson's third step prayer. But if the guy's been sober any length of time, I send him home with an homework assignment, and that's to write his own third step prayer to go through. Take Bill Wilson's prayer and use it as an outline to write his own, right? So my goal is to have him make the third step prayer his own, right? More specific, the prayer goes, God, I offer myself to thee. Well, what are you offering to God? Be specific. Are you offering him your sobriety? Yep. Are you offering him your life? Well, what part of your life? Your relationship? Yep. Your health? Yep. Your work? Yep. Your bank account? Yep. More is better in this scenario. When you're writing this prayer, the more detail, my third step prayer is a full 8.5 by 11 page now. And I rewrite it every 6 months when I go through the steps formally. And when I do my prayer and meditation, I will use that third step prayer. I'll whip it out of my big book, and I get down to it, man, and it starts to take on new meaning. It's fresh. I'm not going, God, I offer myself to be the building to do this. I mean, you can quote the prayer. It doesn't mean anything if you're not focused on the meaning behind the words. But when you write it for yourself, it comes alive, and it's yours, and it's unique, and there's not another one. There's not another one on the planet like it. It's the coolest thing to see some little knucklehead who 2 weeks earlier didn't understand God at all. And now he's looking at you with tears in his eyes, and he's talking about his God. Do not miss that experience. It is so cool. If you haven't had it, you don't know what you're missing. It makes life mean so much to see somebody find a God of their understanding. And that's the moment they walk out of the desert. They're not in prison anymore. They're free because they got a God that they can work with, and it's their God.
It's the coolest experience on the planet. It's better than any drug I ever shoved in my arm or drank down my throat. It's awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And if you haven't figured it out, I'll turn it into a snot fest. But it's important stuff, and it's the coolest thing. And we end up crying together. I have a room above my garage, and my wife got me this plaque. It's called the Doghouse. When we're in trouble, we go up to the doghouse, you know? And it's got all my construction equipment, and there's a little table in the back, and we go in the back and we sit at that table, and I'll light some sage, and we'll do some ritual to kind of get into the spirit and invite God into the room, and we do this stuff, and we get on our knees and we pray, and we find God in that room, and we walk out free men. It is the coolest thing on the planet. This is an exercise. I can't tell you how powerful it is. Don't miss the opportunity. Instructions are right there for you. Next. Oh, no. What am I doing? How many minutes do I have, JR? 15. Cool. We're going to jump into this. We're not going to rate inventory yet. I want to show you. I created something I call the short form. Really important for you guys to know where it came from, because people will say, well, that's not in the big book. I'm going, yeah, it is in the big book. Let me show you where it comes from. All right. What destroys more alcoholics than anything else? Resentment, not alcohol, right? We cannot forget this. This is a really important statement, right? And I say it kind of in jest, but it's really, really important. We do not die from alcohol. We die from anger. It kills us. We rot from the inside out. And nobody on the planet handles it better than us. You know, I always like to use this description because word pictures mean a lot to me. And if I can give you a word picture, hopefully it'll mean the same thing to you. It's like we're sitting in a cesspool and the level is right here, right? And the turds are floating by, but there are turds, and it's warm and we know it. And all we want in life is for people just to stop throwing rocks and making waves, right? Because then we kind of go under a little bit, right? That's us when we're dealing with resentment. We can sit in a resentment and nurture that little baby like it's a little baby rabbit, and we cuddle it, and it's so warm. It's our resentment, and we just really get into that thing. The entire time we are killing ourselves. We're ripping our soul out and pissing all over it. It's brutal what we do to ourselves. If anybody else on the planet did to us what we do to ourselves, we would literally... The only evidence that they ever existed would be a little lime dust after we buried them, you know? We'd take them out. But for us, we do it to ourselves over and over and over again. And as it says in our book, we get a misshapen pleasure out of it. You know, it's the key to our disease. But I digress. What do I got up there? Resentment is the number one offender. From it, it destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem how many? All forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, mental obsession, physical craving, physically ill, right? We have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We need to have a piece of paper. That's why I created the the short form. It is a piece of paper, right? You notice, I mentioned this before, the big book, resentments are so important and they kill us. The book gives us 3 very specific, separate tools to deal with resentment. I'm going to show you the short form, which is tool number 1. On page 84, we're given the spot check resentment tool that we're supposed to be doing every single day as part of our prayer and meditation. And then there's a third tool that we use down the line. Let me show you, I got it here. Right? There's the spot check inventory that we're supposed to do throughout the day when resentment starts to crop up. We kill it before it gets its hooks into us, right? The short form is for when the resentment's got its hooks into us. If you haven't caught it with a short form and it digs its heels in and it's really owns you, the claws are in, the only way to get rid of it is to sit down formally and write out a short form, right? But if it starts to get pissed off during the day because your boss says something, or a coworker even better, somebody that's equal at your level sabotages you in some business meeting, you know, and hurts your feelings, then you do the spot check inventory. You write that resentment, you know, you go through that process, and it's the 4 stages, right? We tell somebody immediately, we ask God to remove it, right? We go through that process, we make amends quickly. If we've harmed anybody, we resolutely turn our thoughts to somebody we can help. You know, love and tolerance of others is our code. That's the spot check piece. But there's a last one. People talk about gratitude lists in meetings all the time, and nobody knows where they come from. It's part of our program. It comes from page 119. Did it come up there? It's my clicker's not working. Let's try it. There we go. Gratitude list. If you've written about an inventory and you've gotten rid of it and you're free from it, right? Let's say you wrote about your father. Not that I've ever written it, but he was on my first 15 years worth of inventories. Every single inventory had resentments about my dad, and I wrote about him. And I finally put it to bed. I got my dad out of my mind, and then I go to a family gathering, and everybody starts telling me stories and reminding me about the events that were on my old inventories, and they start to try to rekindle that resentment, and they're making fun of it, and they're laughing about it at my expense. That's a resentful thought, and here it comes. If I allow it to go, that resentment's going to get its claws back into me. Or I can be grateful and say, you know what, thank God it's not then. Thank God I'm sober today. Thank God Dad's sober. And boom, you do the gratitude list, 3 or 4 items on that gratitude list, and before you know it, that thought's gone. It doesn't own you. It's a powerful tool. It comes right out of our program from page 119. When resentful thoughts come, pause, not take action, pause and count your blessings. It means you got to stop, reconnect with God and say, geez, God, thank God you've given me all this grace. Look at these blessings I have in my life. It's like looking at the glass half full instead of half empty. This is a short form, right? Let's break it down and see where it comes from, right? Top left-hand corner, highlighted in red, it says people, institution, or principle, right? Boom, I gotta keep going. Column 1, we listed the people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. It comes from 64:3. All I did was quote it and put it up in the top left-hand corner. All right? Column 2, we asked ourselves why we're angry. Right? From 65:3, we went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. So what do I have up on the top of the short form? I have, why are you angry? It says we ask ourselves why we're angry. Be very specific, and it must be the truth. The book says that it must be thorough, and we have to be honest about it. I found that when it comes to the word thorough, it wasn't translating. People were getting it wrong, so I changed that a little bit and said it's got to be specific. Example, one of my early inventories was my dad, column 1, always beat me, was column 2. And my sponsor said, so your dad's in prison? I said, what are you talking about? And he says, well, if he always beats you, he'd be in prison today. I wasn't being thorough. I wasn't being honest. I call that the mushroom theory. You take a little piece of truth and you cover it over with a whole bunch of bullshit. What I needed to say was when my father beat me, or the 6 times in my childhood that my father beat me. That was the truth. It has to be very specific, because everything in column 3 is based off what's in column 2. If you have a lie in column 2, then all of column 3 is a lie and all of column 4 is a lie. So get very specific and have it be the truth in column 2. Does that make sense? 2 things I'm always looking for is always and never. Instant red flag. If I see an always in there, stop. Let's talk about this. How can it be always? There's very rare accounts where it's always. Same thing is true with never. My mother was never there for me. I wish I had a dime for every time I heard that crap. I'm like, oh, so your mother abandoned you when you were a child? Well, no. Well, then she was there sometimes. It may not be the way you wanted. Let's get specific. Does that make sense? And I'm making fun of this, but after you've done it so many thousands of times that I've done it, it gets kind of funny after a while. You don't understand, I'm different. I call that the alcoholic battle cry. You just don't understand, I'm different. I'm unique. Yeah, right. All right. Then the big book gives us this example, right? And it says from 64:3, in most cases we found that it was our number 1, self-esteem, number 2, our pocketbooks, number 3, our ambitions, number 4, our personal relationships. Then it goes down under 9, and I got it highlighted in red. There's our security, then further down it says our sex relations, and then in column 3, all the way down on the far right, there's pride. Those are the 7 areas of self that the big book gives us to be effective. So on my short form, there they are. Boom, 7 areas of self. I just took them out, and I gave you a little definition. This is Dave's definition for what each one of those words means. Makes it easier to do the inventory when you look at it. To say, did it affect my self-esteem, how I feel or see about myself? Well, yeah, if it affects that, then it makes it easier to answer the question, yes or no. Right? We're going to do something later when we come back from lunch. We're going to do something called theater of the lie. which is an expanded third column. We're going to take a look at what's really going on in our mind behind column 3. I don't do that anymore normally, but as a favor for JR, he dragged me out of my obstinacy to say, okay, I'll do theater of the lie for you guys, because I found that when I would teach theater of the lie, people would get stuck in the third column, and they wouldn't ever get to the fourth column, and they'd start to try to figure out the characters in their head and try to control the characters in the head. And as Einstein said, you can't solve the problem with the mind that created it. It's just impossible. So I stopped teaching it. I take guys through differently now, and what they don't realize is we're really kind of doing theater of the lie. They just don't know. I don't call it that, and they don't know what the hell I'm doing to them. But we're talking about the itty bitty shitty committee, and we're going to cipher that out. And I show them what's the takeaway, and I'm going to show you guys. There's a valid takeaway from theater of the lie that you should carry you into column 4 when you get there. Today, I look at column 3 like a scale. You know how we always like to use the scale from 1 to 10? In Alcoholics Anonymous, we have a scale from 1 to 7. If this resentment affects all 7 areas, I call it a full Monty. That's a monster resentment. I got to take care of that like right now. If it's only affected like 3 areas of my life, am I going to run out and get drunk over it tomorrow? Probably not. But if I don't address it 3 months, 6 months, a year down the road, guess what? It's going to affect 5 areas of my life. And if I don't address it then, pretty soon it's going to address 7 areas, and I'm going to get drunk over it. So it's still a valid, it has the potential to kill me. It's just it's not a coiled cobra ready to strike like a 7 area is, or a 6 area. So for expediency, I just look down and see how many of these 7 it is affected. And then I show them in column 4 how the theater works for us. And we'll deal with that in a little bit. Cool. From 66.1 to 66.4. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, who permits them? We do. Do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? But the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of what? Spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal, means it's going to kill us. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. That's the problem with resentment. We disconnect from our source of power. I'd like to use the analogy of a vacuum cleaner. All of us have had the experience probably when you go around the corner with a vacuum cleaner, you get to the end of the cord and you're still trying to get that last 6 inches, and all of a sudden, boom, it becomes unplugged. You know instantly when that vacuum cleaner is unplugged from its source of power, right? Why is it that we don't in our lives? We get up in the morning, we say our prayer and meditation, we're connected spiritually, we can feel the presence of God, our skin is electric, we walk out the front door, and then we wake up like 2 hours later and we're pissed off, and we don't understand when we unplugged from that cord, but we plugged back into our ego, right? That's why resentments are so dangerous, because we disconnect from God and we don't even realize we've disconnected from God. The moment you disconnect from God, you're wide open for suddenly or strange mental blank spot. You're walking out without your spiritual armor. You're wide open to get drunk, and all it takes is somebody to piss us off the right way, that we didn't realize our buttons were sticking up too high, and they pushed on that button, and boom, we're off to the races, right? Look at the next sentence. If we were to live, is that important for you? I think so. What? We had to be free of anger? That's like our number one go-to tool. And they're taking that away from us? They better give me something to replace it with. And we do. God. Right? The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are what? Poison. We turned back to the list. What list? Column 1, 2, and 3. For it held the key to our future. Is that important? The key to your future? I think so. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, whether it's truth or not, it has the power to actually kill. How could we escape? We saw these resentments must be mastered, but how? Oops, I got a typo there. But bow. We would not wish them any more way than alcohol. Of course, this was our course. We realized the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. I've been hearing this trend a lot lately, and it's really bothering me. They call this the sick man's prayer. This is not the sick man's prayer. To even make that statement, it's like I'm up here on the spiritual hilltop and I'm looking down on that sick man down there. It's spiritually arrogant crap. It's not the sick man's prayer. And let me show you why. Well, actually, it is the sick man's prayer. I call it the forgiveness prayer, right? It comes from 67.0 to 67.1. Though we did not like their symptoms, what's in column 2, and the way they disturbed us, what's in column 3, they, like ourselves, were sick too. Right? Who's the sick one here? Us. We asked God. Anytime you see the book says ask or ask God, it's a prayer. Put a square around it. Right? This is a forgiveness prayer. Because who are we praying for? Let's see what it says. We ask God to help who? Us. We're not praying for the sick man. Well, we are, but the sick man is the one in the mirror. We're praying for ourselves. We're the sick one. They don't even know that this is going on. Right? We ask God to help us show them the same. Number 1, tolerance. 2, pity. Number 3, patience, that we would cheerfully. Number 4, grant a sick friend. Number 5, when a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? Number 7, God saved me from being angry. Number 8, now thy will be done. We avoid retaliation. 9, argument. 10, we wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we'd destroy our chances at being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take 11, a kindly, and 12, tolerant view of each and every one.
12.
There's 12 of them. Imagine that. This is a 12-part prayer, right? And I even give it to you. Here's all 12 parts. What is number 1? What is number 12? Tolerant view. What's the difference? Tolerance is something that you do that I have to put up with, right? You're always talking over me when I try to have a conversation with you. You're always condescending, whatever that happens to be. Notice I use the word always? It's never always. When you're condescending, right? I have to tolerate your behavior. Tolerant view is how I see you. So I always think about this guy named Jim, right? We all have this buddy named Jim. And Jim's a nose picker. He doesn't even realize he's doing it, but he's always picking at his nose, right? We have to tolerate the behavior because he's our friend, right? You know, but he's always picking at it. It's really disgusting. Every once in a while, he'll take one, you know, for the team, right? So I tolerate Jim's behavior, but when I think about Jim as a nose picker. Well, that's not right. I should think of him as a sick child of God who needs help and understanding, you know, not as the friggin' nose picker, right? So the tolerant view is my internal, how I see Jim. The tolerance is external, the behavior that Jim's doing that's affecting me. Does that make sense? That's why it's in there. And here's what it looks like on the short form. There's the forgiveness prayer. Before we go from column 3 to column 4, we have to forgive. Resentment inventory, guys, 80% of resentment inventory is about forgiveness. Without forgiveness, you're a dead man. If you can't forgive what's in column 2 and 3, your lens is colored. You're going to try to go look at your side of the street, and what's going to be thinking in your mind is, well, yeah, I hurt them, but they hurt me too. We don't care what they did to us. We got to forgive, and until you've forgiven, you can't put away what they did to you and then look at your side of the street. It's critically important that you forgive before you look at column 4. And column 4 is this. Were we selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Where were we to blame? This is our side of the street. Once you've forgiven. So 80% of resentment inventory is done for forgiveness. 15% is to uncover the fear. Column 4, question 4. Where was I frightened? Because fears trigger all of our character defects. So we need to draw that out. And maybe 5% is the harms we've done to others. But by far, the lion's share of why we do resentment inventory is for finding forgiveness. For us to forgive.
Putting out of our minds.
Yes, putting out of the minds the harms to others and done. And there it is. Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. Right? Now we have the short form. Let's see what it looks like to use the short form. And when we get back from lunch, I'm going to show you what it looks like to use the short form of inventory. Way cool. It is 12 o'clock, right? 12:05?
Yep.
So how long do we give them for lunch?
2 hours.
2 hours. Be back at 1400 for military types or 2 o'clock.